Hello, we're Lilith and Lara here with Coffee, Cakes, and Castles, where we will be covering the 20,000 to 25,000 castles of Germany. We'll be talking about historical facts, myths, legends, and drama.
And today we'll be talking about the Bavarian Versailles, the last of Ludwig II's places that actually made it to the building phase. It's Herrenchiemsee.
Hello, I'm Lilith from America.
And I'm Lara, and we're just two girls who happen to love all things involving coffee, cakes, and castles, especially when you can have coffee and cake inside a castle. And in this episode, we'll be concluding the castles of Ludwig II with Schloss Herrenchiemsee, his ode to the Palace of Versailles and King Louis XIV.
And as a reminder, we really are just two girls who love learning more about the castles of Germany. If you are interested in learning about some castle facts without having to look them up yourself, then this is for you. And thanks for listening in.
Yes, and if you listen to any of our previous episodes on Ludwig II's castles, then you know that he loved the theatre. So let's set the stage. If you will, picture the expansive blue waters of Lake Chiemsee, which has also been referred to as the Bavarian Sea, and you'll arrive on the shores of Herreninsel, and from there take either a horse-drawn carriage ride or a walk through the forest. Walking the garden path with greenery and colorful flowers, you'll hear the sound of the fountains, and up ahead rises the expansive palace of Herrenchiemsee, Ludwig II's own the Bavarian Versailles.
And as Lara said, if you'd like to visit Herrenchiemsee, you'll access it by the water and can book a ferry to Herreninsel. The walk to the palace is about 15 minutes according to the website, and there are carriage rides that operate in the summer. Always check the website for ticketing information, as Herrenchiemsee can only be accessed by guided tours with tickets available for purchase online. You'll also find the King Ludwig II Museum, which is located on the ground floor of the new palace. And you can also see the old Augustinian monastery or the old palace. So a couple things to see, yes.
Mm-hmm. And Chiemsee is so pretty. I've been there like 3 times, and it's so pretty. So just the lake. I haven't been to the castle, but the lake is really pretty. And yes, let's dive into history, will we? We're going back, way back to early medieval times, and before there was a massive sprawling palace, there was an early medieval monastery which was thought to be built between 620 and 629. And this would have been founded by the Burgundian missionary Saint Eustace of Luxeuil. And just some interesting facts about Saint Eustache of Luxeuil. He and his monks would work on converting patrons across northeastern Gaul and Bavaria. He entered into a conflict with a monk named Agrestius, who would leave Luxeuil to preach against strict Columban rule, and record states that Eustace cured Santa Berger of blindness. So we have a miracle. His monastery on Herrenchiemsee is the oldest monastery in the Duchy of Bavaria.
In 765, the Benedictine Abbey of Herrenchiemsee would be established by the Agilolfing Duke Tassilo III of Bavaria, located at the northern tip of Herreninsel. The Agilolfings were a noble family that would rule the Duchy of Bavaria from 550 to 788. We've come to some medieval drama with Tassilo III, the last duke of the Agilolfing dynasty, but we'll keep it short since we still need to get to our castle. Tassilo III would enter a conflict at an early age. After his father died, he became ward of his uncle Pepin the Short, later King Pepin the Short. And Pepin's half-brother, Grifo, would try to take the duchy as his own, but Pepin would install Tassilo in his place, and Tassilo would swear himself to Pepin. Again, this is the shortened version. There is much more to it if you want to look into it. But we're going to get into his arrival at Herreninsel. He would found the Benedictine Abbey as part of his broad monastic patronage that included Gars, Inischen, and Kremsmünster. This would help consolidate the Bavarian identity and extended Christian influence into Slavic Carinthia, which in turn would strengthen his rule and his authority, and the abbey would survive for centuries. Tassilo's fall was an interesting one as it was well orchestrated. Carolingian annals portray him as an oath breaker who abandoned Pepin's army, but modern historians point out that these accounts were written under Charlemagne long after Tassilo had been imprisoned. So they're kind of questioning the accuracy there. And by the time of the Synod of Frankfurt in 794, Tassilo was brought out of monastic confinement and compelled to renounce all claims to Bavaria, which led to the end of the Agilfing rule.
Hmm.
Yes.
And after Tassilo came the Carolingian takeover of Bavaria. So that happened afterwards. In the early 12th, many Benedictine houses were reorganized or replaced as church reforms would sweep through Germany. And the Benedictine community would fade from Herreninsel and would give rise to an Augustinian canonry in its place. Here, the clergy would serve in pastoral and administrative roles. Church records note the establishment of a Chorherrenstift, or House of Canons, on the islands. And in 1215, the biggest transformation for the abbey would occur when Archbishop Eberhard II of Salzburg would reorganize church territories in the Eastern Alps, even creating a new diocese, the Bistum Chiemsee.
And the Augustinian convent on Herreninsel was elevated to the status of a cathedral chapter, with the island church becoming the cathedral of the Diocese of Chiemsee. And it should be noted that the arrival of the Augustinian canons changed the island's rhythm of life. Unlike the Benedictines, these were not monks who withdrew from the world. Instead, they were clergy who managed the lands, oversaw pastoral care, and acted as the administrative backbone of the new diocese. So, in other words, they were very involved in actually running things. And the cathedral chapter on Herreninsel even had its own seal and treasury. It functioned as a semi autonomous institution under the Archbishop of Salzburg. It was one of the smallest episcopal seats in medieval Europe, and as things changed around them, like the rise of the Wittelsbach family and the Reformation, things at the Cathedral of Chiemsee would continue. It wasn't until the early 19th century that the cathedral chapter would be dissolved and the diocese was pretty much extinguished at that point. Chiemsee was one of the small four suffragan sees created by Salzburg to tighten control over the Eastern Alps. Its bishops rarely lived on Herreninsel, most served in Salzburg, and visited the island only for major feasts. Though it was small, the diocese endured for nearly 6 centuries, quietly maintaining its chapter and traditions until secularization swept it away in 1803. It was transitioned to the Old Palace in 1873, or Altes Schloss, when Ludwig II would come to Herreninsel to erect what he hoped would be a palace to rival Versailles.
And we've talked about Ludwig II's relationship to Richard Wagner in previous episodes, but let's talk about the influence that Louis the
14th.
14th had on Ludwig II. And they may have lived centuries apart, but Ludwig II saw Louis XIV as a model of kingship. And Ludwig II believed in absolute monarchy. One shining example is that of the Byzantine-inspired throne room in Neuschwanstein. And similarly, he would reconstruct Versailles as a monument to absolute monarchy with a near exact copy of Versailles' stateroom and Hall of Mirrors. It should be noted that though he admired Louis XIV and his belief in absolutism, Ludwig II himself was a constitutional monarch.
And I find it all interesting because though he was all about absolute monarchy, he wasn't interested in politics.
Yes, that is like a little bit weird.
Yeah, but that was his
And
idealized version of how things would
yeah,
go.
definitely. And as we talked about, Ludwig II was not so much interested in his politics, and his sprawling palace was built simply for his pleasure as a private retreat and a monument to the Sun King.
And let's get into the actual construction of the Bavarian Versailles. If the name Georg von Dolman sounds familiar, it's because he was also the architect for Schloss Linderhof and had taken over the building of Neuschwanstein. Dolman would study Versailles, and under him, the construction of Herrenchiemsee would begin in 1878. Originally slated to be built in the Grosvenor Valley alongside Linderhof, it was decided instead that it would be built on Herreninsel. Interestingly enough, what brought Herreninsel to Ludwig II's attention was a petition from local communities for Ludwig II to save Herreninsel from being logged bare, and he did just that. So he saved the island. And just as with Neuschwanstein and Linderhof, the plans for Herrenchiemsee underwent several changes, and the palace that is seen today is the 14th version of Ludwig II's plan. The palace is laid out in a W with flanking wings. It was intended to not just be a version of Versailles, but was actually intended to rival Versailles. It's in the French Rococo and Baroque style. However, it was never completed, and 50 of the 70 rooms remained uncompleted at the time of Ludwig II's death in 1886. And Ludwig II would only spend about 10 days in the palace.
Crazy. 10
It is
days.
crazy. Yes, only 10 days in
Wow.
this beautiful Baroque palace. And
Mhm.
the palace also included modern innovations. As we know, Ludwig II liked to keep things up to date with all things modern for the time, and it had central heating, running water, and modernized toilet systems so they could be flushed. And we've talked a lot about the people involved when it comes to the castles and their history. So let's talk about Georg von Dolman, because he was an integral part to all three of Ludwig II's castles. He was born in 1830 and would receive his technical and artistic education at the Polytechnical Institute and the Academy of Fine Arts. He would start out with the Royal Bavarian State Railways and would then move on to working on churches. It was in 1868 that he would enter into the service of King Ludwig II, and from there his career took off. And how could it not? Because Ludwig II certainly had a lot of plans, and in 1884 he would fall out of favor with King Ludwig and was replaced by Julius Hoffmann, who would work on parts of the interiors of Ludwig's palaces.
Yeah. And let's get inside. Stepping into the halls of Herrenchiemsee is stepping into the world of Ludwig II and being able to see his dreams come to life, which is just amazing. Let's talk about his vision and the grandeur of Herrenchiemsee. The state staircase is the palace's monumental entryway, which was modeled after the ambassador's staircase of Versailles, and the floor is patterned with diamonds leading to a marble staircase. Very fancy. And the walls are clad in marble and stucco marble in warm colors with colorful murals and gold accents. And the state bedroom at Herrenchiemsee is lavish and larger than its Versailles counterpart. When you picture it, picture lots and lots and lots of gold and a grand chandelier. The whole room is truly beautiful and ornate, and it would never be used by Ludwig II, though it was the first room to be presented to him as completed.
And that is
Such
such
a
a
shame.
shame because
Yes.
the room is truly beautiful and grand, and it's just sad that he never got to use it.
Yes. Really sad. Well, the Great Hall of Mirrors is nearly an exact replica of that one in Versailles, and it was purposeful. And we have King Ludwig's vision and Georg Dolman to thank for it, and 98 meters. It is actually longer than the original in Versailles. Again, picture lots of gold, painted ceilings, and perhaps most impressive, 33 glass chandeliers. It was truly fit for a king. And just like he had at Schloss Linderhof, Ludwig II had his magic table, the Tischlein deck dich, in the dining room so that he could dine without interruptions. Lilas talked about the Tischlein deck dich in our last episode.
Yes, and he was dining in his own version of Versailles, and we know that he liked to sometimes imagine as though he was dining with King Louis XIV, so it must have felt pretty real here.
Mhm.
And we will move on to the gardens. Today, when you walk up to the palace, you'll walk through beautiful symmetrical gardens on a grand axial layout with massive fountains. The gardens were designed by Karl von Effner to mirror that of, you guessed it, Versailles Gardens. Sadly, Ludwig II would not see the gardens completed either, as only the main axis and the fountains were completed before his death.
Aw, poor
Yes.
him. But we've come now to Ludwig II's death and the end of the construction at Herrenchiemsee. As an adult, Ludwig II had started to become withdrawn from his political duties, even more so than he had before. He felt humiliated by Bavaria's defeat in the Austro-Prussian War at 1866 and with the creation of the German Empire of 1871. He was spending less and less in Munich, had spent significant money on Richard Wagner, and was spending even more money on his fantasy palaces like Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and now Herrenchiemsee. He was living a life of seclusion and was more awake at night than during the day, and surrounded himself with fantasy, myth, and music. Towards the end, he had spent all his private revenue and was borrowing against his civil list, refusing his political duties, and refusing even state officials access to his palaces. And though the diagnosis of insanity seems unfair, as the psychiatrist never even met with him, his ministers would use this to declare him unfit. In June 1886, he was deposed, taken into custody from Neuschwanstein, and would be found under very, very suspicious circumstances in Lake Starnberg.
And we cover all that in our Neuschwanstein episode if you haven't already listened to it. But the short answer is while there's no concrete evidence that still exists, there may have at one point been evidence that he was actually murdered, as it was said that his coat had bullet holes in the back. And of course, this coat no longer exists as it was supposedly burned in a house fire. As we said,
Weird.
suspicious. Yes.
Very suspicious, yeah. And that was one of the biggest points why we started this podcast, because we were like, what's going on? They're saying different stuff in different palaces about all the happening around Ludwig II. And we dived into all the history just to find out what happened and to make more story about it.
Yes.
Yeah. But with the construction halted, some of the incomplete sections were demolished and the palace would be opened to the public shortly after his death. In 1923, Crown Prince Ruprecht would cede the palace to Bavaria. And today you can find details about Ludwig's life at the museum at Herrenchiemsee. And they have rooms displaying his possessions and some Wagner-related materials.
Before we come to the end, some interesting facts about castles that could have been. Ludwig had planned a Byzantine palace in the Grosvenor Valley, a Chinese summer palace, and Schloss Falkenstein. And Herrenchiemsee was Ludwig II's extravagant dream, a version of Versailles to rival the original. Sadly, it remained unfinished, though the rooms that were completed are truly beautiful. And most importantly, can you have coffee and cake at this castle? And the answer is yes. There's a self-service
Nice.
cafe as well as a restaurant, and they have actual cakes and coffee as well.
Amazing. That is the
And
best news.
yes, because you can have coffee and cake sitting in the castle, and they also have a patio as well. Yeah.
Love it.
And I think
Nice.
the best part about having coffee and cake at a castle is imagining that, you're part of these things.
Yes. I
Yes.
love it. That's the spirit. Why we
Mhm.
were there. Yes. I love it.
Yes, it was amazing. And also, Herrenchiemsee has walking trails as well that you
Hmm.
can go on. So you can plan that in as part of your day as well if you choose to visit.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah.
Nice. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Now we completed all castles which were out of the hands of Ludwig II. So, yeah, amazing. We will hear from him. I think he's going to be in some other stories, but not in his castles anymore. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.